I stared at the woman sitting across from me in the bank manager's office, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against a manila folder that held my name on the tab. She kept glancing at the account number on the slip of paper I'd handed her, then back at me, then at my rust-colored cardigan with wooden buttons that had a small stain near the hem from the collard greens I'd been eating for 3 days straight. Her eyebrows drew together in that particular way people's faces shift when something doesn't add up, when the person in front of them doesn't match the numbers on their screen. "Ms. Carter," she said slowly, and I could hear her trying to choose the right words. "I'm going to need you to sit down. But we need to go back. We need to go back to understand how I ended up in that chair with $68 in my checking account and $450 I didn't know existed. We need to go back to the empty church. I was sitting in the back pew of an empty church after everyone has left. The sanctuary was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning struggling against Memphis heat, that thick summer air that makes everything slow down and stick to your skin. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I had nowhere else to be. No job to go to, no one waiting for me. Just the apartment in that old brick building with the fire escape, where the fan spins all day and barely moves the hot air around. The church was the only place I could still breathe. The framed picture of Jesus in my hallway at home watched me leave every morning, and I wondered if he was watching now, if he saw me sitting here with my purse clutched in my lap, the velvet pouch inside it pressing against my thigh through the worn fabric, my grandmother's wedding ring. Too small to wear, but kept in that pouch. I carried it everywhere. It was all I had left of the people who loved me before everything fell apart. My son died 2 years ago. His name was Marcus. He was 23 years old, and he died alone in a gas station bathroom from an overdose of pills he bought from someone we'll never find. The police officer who came to my door had kind eyes, but kindness doesn't change anything. It doesn't bring back your child. It doesn't stop the world from continuing to spin when yours has completely stopped. I remember the funeral. The way my husband stood beside me, his hand on my lower back, steering me through the receiving line like I was a child who might wander off. The way he spoke in low tones to my family, my friends, his voice heavy with concern. "She's not doing well," he'd say. "She's having trouble processing this." And everyone nodded because of course I was having trouble. My son was dead. But that's how it started. That's how the gaslighting began, so subtle I didn't even recognize it was happening. Psychological warfare disguised as concern, reality distortion wrapped in the language of love. The church felt safer than home. At least here, the silence was honest. At least here, no one was telling me I was remembering things wrong, that I was becoming irrational, that my grief was making me paranoid. At least here, I could sit with the truth. My son was gone, and I was drowning, and nobody was coming to save me. My phone buzzed in my purse. I didn't look at it. I knew what it would say. Another message from a family member, relaying something my husband wanted me to know. Another expression of concern. Another suggestion that I needed help. That I needed to come home. That I needed to let him take care of things, because I clearly couldn't handle them myself. Outside, I could hear the waterfront neighborhood coming alive as the day cooled slightly. Fishing boats and seagulls. The sound of someone hosing down a dock. Life continuing for everyone else while mine had contracted to this single pew, this single moment of being able to exist without being told I was existing wrong. I thought about my sister. My older sister, who died 4 years ago, during the last good year I can remember. Before Marcus died, before I lost everything, she would have known what to do. She always knew what to do, even when we were fighting. Even during those years when we barely spoke because we were both too stubborn to apologize first. Our relationship was complicated but loving. We argued often but always found our way back to each other. She protected me from everything until cancer took her, and then there was no one standing between me and the world. She died 3 months before Marcus was born. She never got to meet him. Sometimes, in my darkest moments, I was grateful she didn't have to know I failed to protect him the way she always protected me. She didn't have to see me fall apart. She didn't have to see what I became after he died. The velvet pouch in my purse felt heavier than it should. That ring was all she left me. She was a teacher. She lived modestly. There was no inheritance, no great sum of money. Nothing but her love and her memory and this tiny circle of gold that wouldn't fit over my knuckle. It was enough. It had to be enough. I stood up from the pew, my knees creaking. 42 years old, and my body already felt ancient. Grief ages you in ways that have nothing to do with time. I walked down the center aisle, past the rows of empty pews, past the altar with its white cloth and brass cross. At the door, I turned back one last time. The Jesus in the stained glass window looked down at me with sad eyes, and I wondered if he was sad for me or sad because of me. Either way, I couldn't stay here forever. The heat hit me like a wall when I stepped outside. Memphis in summer, the kind of heat that makes your clothes stick to your body and turns breathing into work. I walked the 6 blocks back to my apartment, past the tourists taking photos of the river, past the restaurants I could no longer afford to eat at, past the life I used to have before it was systematically taken from me. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, no elevator. By the time I reached my door, I was sweating and breathless. Inside, the fan was still spinning, still failing to cool anything. The pot of collard greens sat on the stove. The 3rd meal I'd made from the same batch because it was all I could afford. I'd picked off all the good pieces already. What was left was mostly stems and broth. I had $68 in my bank account. The landlord had given me until the end of the month. That was 11 days away. I had no plan. No family I could ask for help without being told I needed to reconcile with my husband, that I needed to stop being so difficult, that grief was making me unreasonable. I had nowhere to go and no way to get there. That's what gaslighting does. It doesn't just make you question your reality. It makes everyone else question it too. It isolates you so completely that when you try to explain what's happening, you sound exactly as crazy as they've been saying you are. I sat at my small kitchen table and looked at the bills spread across its surface. Rent, utilities, the minimum payment on the credit card I'd maxed out buying groceries. The numbers didn't add up. They hadn't added up in months. I'd been treading water, and now I was going under, and nobody was watching me drown. My phone buzzed again. I picked it up this time. A text from my former mother-in-law. "He just wants to talk to you. He's worried. We're all worried. Please don't shut us out." I deleted it without responding. I'd stopped trying to explain. They wouldn't believe me anyway. They'd been told I was unstable, that I was having a breakdown, that my grief had made me paranoid and irrational. They'd been prepared for months to dismiss anything I said. That's how good he was at it. That's how thoroughly he destroyed my credibility before I even knew I needed to defend myself. After Marcus died, I couldn't work, couldn't focus, couldn't do anything but exist in a fog of pain that made every moment feel like drowning. My husband said he understood, said he'd take care of things, said I should focus on healing, so I let him handle the bills. Let him manage the accounts. Let him make decisions while I tried to remember how to breathe without my son in the world. And slowly, quietly, methodically, he moved money. Changed passwords, removed my name from accounts, had conversations with our financial advisor where he expressed concern about my mental state, filed paperwork I didn't see, made changes I didn't know about until I tried to access money that was suddenly gone. When I finally understood what was happening, when I finally saw the pattern, I tried to tell people. My family, his family, our friends. But he'd laid the groundwork so carefully. "She's not herself," he'd say sadly. "The grief has really affected her judgment. She's accusing me of things that aren't true. I'm worried about her." And they believed him. Because I was grieving. Because I was barely functional. Because the accusation sounded exactly as paranoid as he'd told them I'd become. By the time I left, I had nothing. He kept the house, kept the savings, kept everything except what I could carry. And I couldn't fight him because fighting required money for lawyers. And I didn't have money because he'd taken it all while telling everyone I was losing my mind. The church was my refuge because it was free. The apartment was my prison because it was all I could afford. And the ring in the velvet pouch was my only connection to a time when someone loved me enough to protect me from exactly this kind of harm. I stood up from the table and walked to the bedroom. The dresser against the wall had been my sister's. I'd taken it from her apartment after she died, along with a few other pieces of furniture that nobody else wanted. It was solid oak, heavy, the kind of furniture they don't make anymore. I'd been meaning to go through it for 4 years, kept putting it off, couldn't face her things, couldn't touch the remnants of her life. But I was packing to leave, sorting through what little I had left, trying to figure out what I could carry and what I'd have to abandon. I opened the top drawer. Her clothes were still inside, neatly folded. I ran my hand over a sweater she used to wear, then lifted it out. Underneath were birthday cards I'd sent her over the years, a broken watch, a dried flower from some occasion I couldn't remember. And at the bottom, rolled up in a rubber band, a stack of papers. I pulled them out. Savings bond certificates, my name on them. Dozens of them. Small amounts, $25, $50, purchased over decades, and tucked between them, a bank slip with an account number I didn't recognize. My hands started shaking. I sat down on the bed, spreading the certificates across the faded quilt. There had to be 40 of them, maybe more. Each one carefully dated, carefully preserved. My sister's handwriting on a sticky note attached to one. For when you need it. She knew. Somehow she knew I would need this. That I would end up alone and desperate and drowning. She'd spent her whole life quietly building me a life raft, purchasing these bonds with money she didn't have, setting aside what she could from a teacher's salary, and she never said a word. She just loved me, even when we fought, even when I was difficult, even when I didn't deserve it. I cried then, sitting on that bed with her certificates spread around me like some kind of strange currency of love. Cried for her. Cried for Marcus. Cried for myself. Cried because after 2 years of drowning, I'd finally found something to hold on to. The next morning, I went to the bank. The branch near the waterfront, the one I'd walked past 100 times without thinking about it. I brought the certificates and the bank slip, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fill out the forms the teller gave me. She looked at the account number, her expression shifting from routine to something else. Something uncertain. "Let me get the manager," she said. And that's how I ended up in that office, in that chair, with the manager looking at me like I didn't make sense. Like the person in front of her didn't match what she was seeing on her screen. "Ms. Carter," she said again, and this time her voice was different. Softer. Almost reverent. "Are you aware of what's in this account?" I shook my head. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. She turned the screen toward me slowly, like she was revealing something sacred. Her hands were steady on the keyboard. But I noticed her eyes kept darting between the screen and my face, watching for my reaction. "This account was opened 23 years ago," she said, scrolling through the history. "Small deposits, very regular, $50 a month for the first few years. Then it increased, $100 a month. Sometimes more. Every single month for 18 years. 23 years ago. I would have been 19, just starting college. Sarah would have been 22, fresh out of college herself, starting her first teaching job. She was making maybe $30,000 a year back then, and she was putting $50 a month aside, for me, when she could barely afford her own rent. The account holder, the manager continued, listed you as the sole beneficiary, and there's a note here in the file." She clicked something, and her expression softened even more. It says, "For my sister, for when she needs it. Don't tell her unless something happens to me." My throat closed up. I pressed my hand against my mouth, trying to keep the sob inside. "Ms. Carter, the original deposits totaled approximately €27 over 18 years. But with the interest compounding, with the automatic reinvestment she set up, with the certificate maturing and rolling over." She paused, making sure I was listening. "The account has grown significantly." She turned the screen toward me. The number there was impossible. Certificate of deposit that matured and was never claimed. Principal and interest, compounding over years. My sister's name on the original account. Mine listed as beneficiary. The total kept growing because she'd set it to automatically reinvest, set it to keep building even after she died. $450,000. I stared at the screen, at the columns of numbers showing monthly deposits from 2003 to 2021, at Sarah's name at the top of the account, at my name listed as beneficiary, at the note she'd left, for when she needs it. "She knew," I whispered. "She knew I'd need it." The manager leaned forward, her voice gentle. "Ms. Carter, I've been working in banking for 20 years. I've seen a lot of accounts, a lot of families, but I've never seen anyone do something like this. Your sister built you a safety net over 2 decades. She protected you before you even knew you needed protection. Enough to never depend on anyone again. Enough to start over. Enough to breathe without wondering how I'd survive the next month." I stared at that number, and I couldn't process it, couldn't make it real. The manager was saying something about verification, about paperwork, about how long it would take to access the funds. But I wasn't hearing her. I was hearing my sister's voice, from some memory I couldn't quite place. "I'll always take care of you, no matter what." She'd been dead 4 years, and she was still keeping that promise. The waterfront was quieter than usual when I left the bank. The fishing boats and seagulls seemed muted, or maybe it was just that everything felt distant now, like I was watching the world through glass. I held the folder the manager had given me against my chest, walking slowly back toward my apartment, barely noticing the heat that had felt so oppressive just hours before. My phone buzzed. Another text. I almost didn't look, but something made me pull it out. My cousin. "Your husband called. He says you found some money? He wants to discuss the financial implications. Says you need guidance on managing it properly." He knew. Already knew. I don't know how. Maybe he had access to something I didn't know about. Maybe someone at the bank knew someone he knew. Maybe in a town like Memphis, information travels in ways you can't control. But he knew, and now it was starting again. The calls, the concern, the implications that I wasn't capable of handling this myself. I stopped walking, stood there on the sidewalk while people moved around me, tourists and locals going about their lives. I thought about the last 2 years, the systematic way he'd taken everything, the careful construction of my instability, the way he'd convinced everyone who knew me that I couldn't be trusted with my own reality. And I thought about my sister, about the years she spent setting aside money she could have used for herself, about the way she'd protected me my entire life, from schoolyard bullies to bad boyfriends to my own worst decisions, about the way she'd kept protecting me even from the grave. I remembered one specific moment when we were kids. I must have been 7, which made her 10. There was a boy at school who kept stealing my lunch money. Every day for a week, I came home crying, pretending I'd lost the money or spent it on something else. I was too scared to tell the truth, but Sarah knew. She always knew. She waited for him after school one day. I watched from the corner, terrified she'd get hurt, terrified the boy would turn on her. She wasn't bigger than him, wasn't stronger, but she walked right up to him with her shoulders squared and her chin up, and she said something I couldn't hear. Whatever it was made him back away. He never bothered me again. Later, when I asked what she'd said, she smiled. I told him if he touched you again, I'd make sure every kid in school knew he was afraid of a girl. Simple, effective. That was Sarah. She didn't need violence, didn't need to be bigger or stronger. She just needed to be braver than anyone expected. That's who bought those savings bonds. That's who spent decades putting away $25 here, $50 there. The girl who stood up to bullies. The woman who protected me even when I didn't know I needed protection. I deleted the text, blocked my cousin's number, started walking again. By the time I reached my apartment, I knew what I had to do. I had to disappear. Had to leave before he could find a way to take this too. Had to protect what my sister had built for me. I called the lawyer the bank manager had recommended. A woman who specialized in financial abuse. Her name was Patricia Chen, and her voice on the phone was steady and certain in a way that made me want to cry. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. Sitting at my kitchen table with the pot of collard greens still on the stove, I told her about Marcus, about the grief, about the gaslighting and the isolation and the systematic loss of everything I owned, about the accounts I couldn't access, and the house I no longer had any claim to, and the family members who'd been convinced I was unstable, about the way he'd weaponized my grief to justify taking everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long silence. "You know this is abuse," she finally said. "You understand that what he did is a crime." I hadn't known. Or maybe I had known but couldn't name it. Couldn't call it what it was because that would make it real, would make me someone who'd been abused, and I didn't know how to be that person. "We're going to protect this inheritance," Patricia said. "We're going to make sure he can't touch it, and then we're going to help you disappear. If you've ever lost someone who protected you, you know what I felt in that moment. You know the way grief and gratitude can exist in the same breath. You know the pain of being saved by someone who isn't here to see they succeeded." The apartment felt different that night. The fan still spun. The Jesus in the framed picture still watched from the hallway. But something had shifted. For the first time since Marcus died, since my world collapsed, I could imagine a future. Not the future I'd planned. Not the future where my son was alive and I was still married and everything made sense. But a future where I could breathe. Where I could exist without being told I was existing wrong. I pulled out the velvet pouch and held my grandmother's ring up to the light. My sister used to wear this ring on a chain around her neck. She said it reminded her that love persists, that the people who came before us built foundations we're still standing on. I'd never understood what she meant until now. Patricia worked quickly. Within a week, everything was secured. The inheritance was protected in accounts he couldn't access, under legal structures he couldn't touch. She helped me close everything else, open new accounts at a different bank, change my passwords, document everything. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before, who understood exactly how men like my husband operated. Her office was downtown, in a building with good security and a receptionist who knew how to screen callers. The first time I met her in person, I was struck by how normal she looked. I don't know what I expected. Some crusader with fire in her eyes, maybe. Someone larger than life. But Patricia was in her 50s, petite, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and sensible shoes. She looked like someone's aunt, like someone who'd bring cookies to a bake sale. But when she talked about financial abuse, about the patterns and tactics and legal remedies, her voice changed, became harder, more focused. This was someone who'd seen everything, who couldn't be shocked, who'd heard every excuse and rationalization that abusive men offered and had stopped believing any of them years ago. "The law is on your side," she told me during that first meeting. "But the law moves slowly. We need to move fast. We need to protect everything now, before he realizes what we're doing." She had me write down everything I could remember, every account, every asset, every piece of property with my name on it, every password I'd ever used, every security question, every piece of information he might have access to. It took hours. My hand cramped from writing. My head ached from trying to remember details I'd let him handle because I was too broken to handle them myself. "You're not stupid for trusting him," Patricia said when she saw my expression. "That's what marriage is supposed to be. Trust, partnership. He weaponized that against you. That's not your fault." But it felt like my fault. Felt like I should have seen it coming, should have protected myself better, should have been stronger, smarter, more aware. "Every woman who sits in that chair thinks the same thing," Patricia said, gesturing to where I sat. "Every single one. You all think you should have known better, should have been stronger, should have seen the signs. But abuse is designed to be invisible until it's too late. That's what makes it effective." She helped me understand that what happened to me had a name: financial abuse, coercive control, gaslighting. These weren't just buzzwords. They were documented patterns of behavior that courts recognized, that had legal remedies, that I could fight against if I had the right help. "We're going to build you a fortress," she said. "Legal structures so complicated that by the time he figures out how to challenge them, you'll be long gone and safe. We're going to make you invisible to him, untouchable." And she did. She moved money into trusts with names that didn't include mine, set up corporations in states with strong privacy laws, created layers of legal protection that would take an army of lawyers years to untangle. She made me disappear on paper while keeping everything legally mine. "This is going to cost money," I said at one point, looking at all the paperwork, all the filing fees, all the complexity. "Your sister's inheritance includes enough for this," Patricia said. "And honestly, I'd do this pro bono if I had to. But I don't have to, so I won't insult you by offering. You're paying me to do a job. I'm going to do it well." "They all use the same playbook," she told me during one of our meetings. The concerned husband, the unstable wife, the slow erosion of her credibility so that by the time she asks for help, nobody believes her. "You're not the first woman who sat in this office telling me this exact story. You won't be the last. Studies show that 1 in 10 seniors experiences some form of abuse every year," she told me later. "But it happens to younger women too. It happens when we're vulnerable, when we're grieving, when we're not paying attention because we're trying to survive something else. It happens because our culture still tells us that women are less capable of managing money, less rational, more emotional. It happens because abuse is most effective when it's invisible." The phone calls started 3 days after I'd met with Patricia, first from him, then from his family, then from people I hadn't spoken to in months, all suddenly concerned about my well-being, all wanting to help me think through the financial implications of this inheritance, all suggesting I should discuss it with my husband before making any major decisions. I didn't answer. I'd changed my number, but information finds a way. People talk. They sent messages through other family members, all ignored. Apologies, explanations, requests to talk. His sister showed up at my apartment once. I didn't answer the door. Just sat inside listening to her knock, listening to her voice through the thin wood calling my name, and I said nothing. You can't argue with people who don't believe your reality. You can't explain abuse to people who've been convinced you're the problem. You can only save yourself. You can only protect what you have left and build something new from the wreckage. I started packing. Not everything. Just what mattered. The velvet pouch. The framed picture of Jesus. The pot I'd cooked those collard greens in because it had been my mother's, and I'd be damned if I left it behind. Some clothes. Some books. The folder with all the paperwork Patricia had helped me organize. I left the furniture, left the dishes, left everything that tied me to this version of my life. I found a house in a quiet town 3 hours outside of Memphis where nobody knows my history. A little place with a porch and a yard. Nothing fancy. But mine. Actually mine. Paid for in cash so there was no mortgage he could find, no paper trail he could follow. Patricia helped me set it up so the ownership was buried in legal structures that would take years to untangle. She said, "You're not hiding, you're protecting yourself. There's a difference." The day I left Memphis, I stood in the empty apartment one last time. The fan was still spinning. The walls were marked where pictures had hung. The afternoon light came through the window the same way it had every day I'd lived there, golden and thick with summer heat. I thought about the woman who'd moved into this apartment 2 years ago, broken and desperate and barely surviving. I thought about Marcus, about my sister, about all the people I'd lost and all the ways I'd been lost. And I thought about what it means to be saved by someone who isn't here to see it, to carry someone's love forward like a torch passed in the dark. I locked the door behind me, drove out of the waterfront neighborhood past the fishing boats and seagulls, drove past the church where I'd sat in empty pews trying to remember how to pray, drove past the life I'd lost and the life I'd been forced to leave. The further I got from Memphis, the easier it became to breathe. The new house smelled like fresh paint and possibility. I moved in slowly, carefully, placing each object like it was part of some ritual. The Jesus picture went in the hallway. The velvet pouch went in the top drawer of my nightstand. The collard greens pot went in the kitchen, where I planned to fill it with better food, bigger batches, meals I could share with people I hadn't met yet. The first night in the new house, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid or anxious, but because the silence was different. In the Memphis apartment, there had always been noise. Cars outside, neighbors arguing through thin walls, the constant hum of the city that never quite stopped. Here, there was nothing but crickets and the occasional rustle of wind through trees I couldn't name yet. I walked through the empty rooms in the dark, my footsteps echoing on hardwood floors that didn't creak. The house had good bones, the realtor had said. Built in the 1940s. Solid. Lasting. The kind of place that outlives the people who inhabit it. I thought about who'd lived here before me, what stories these walls had witnessed, whether anyone had ever fled here the way I had, desperate and broken and trying to become whole again. In the kitchen, I opened the refrigerator. It was empty except for a bottle of water and some condiments the previous owners had left behind. Tomorrow I'd go shopping, buy real food, fill this space with life. But tonight, I just stood there in the cool light of the refrigerator, feeling the luxury of having food to look forward to, of not having to calculate every purchase, of being able to exist without constant fear. The backyard was small but fenced. In the moonlight, I could see an old garden plot, overgrown with weeds. Something about it called to me. The idea of putting my hands in dirt, growing something, watching life emerge from careful tending. I made a mental note to research what grew well in this region. Tomatoes, maybe. Herbs, things that smelled good and tasted better. My phone sat on the kitchen counter, silent. I'd given the new number to exactly 3 people: Patricia, the bank manager, and one old friend from before my marriage who'd reached out after hearing I'd left. No family members, no one who might accidentally leak my location. The isolation should have felt lonely. Instead, it felt like safety. I started sleeping through the night. Not every night, but some nights. I started eating meals that weren't stretched to last 3 days. Started buying books. Started existing in a way that didn't require constant calculation of what I could afford to lose. The first time I went grocery shopping in the new town, I stood in the produce section for 15 minutes just staring at the fruit. Fresh strawberries, blueberries, raspberries that cost $8 for a tiny container. I'd trained myself not to even look at these things, had learned to walk past them quickly, before the wanting could set in. But now I could afford them. Could afford to buy the expensive berries just because they looked good. Just because I wanted them. I filled my cart slowly, carefully. Not with a list, not with a budget, just with things that appealed to me. Good bread from the bakery section, real butter, cheese that wasn't the cheapest option, a whole chicken I could roast instead of the marked down pieces that were mostly bone, Fresh vegetables I didn't have to worry about eating before they went bad. Coffee beans instead of instant. A bottle of wine just because. At the checkout, I held my breath when the total rang up. $93, more than I used to spend in 2 weeks. The cashier smiled and asked if I'd found everything okay. I nodded, unable to speak, and handed over my new debit card, the one connected to an account that had money in it, the one I could use without fear. The card went through, the receipt printed. I carried my bags to my car and sat in the driver's seat, staring at the groceries in my passenger seat, and I cried. Not sad tears. Relief tears. Gratitude tears. The kind of crying you do when you realize you're not drowning anymore. When you realize you can breathe. That night I made myself dinner. A real dinner. Roasted chicken with herbs I'd bought fresh. Roasted vegetables. A salad with those expensive raspberries on top. I set the table with real plates, not paper, poured myself a glass of wine, sat down in my own house and ate food I'd chosen because I wanted it, not because it was all I could afford. It was the best meal I'd eaten in 2 years, not because the food was fancy, because I was free, because nobody was monitoring what I spent, because I could exist without fear, because my sister's love had made this moment possible. Financial rebuild, security, and independence. That's what Patricia called it. I called it learning to be a person again. Learning to make decisions without wondering if someone was monitoring them. Learning to trust myself after 2 years of being told I couldn't trust my own mind. But I couldn't just live with the money. Couldn't just spend it on myself and move on. My sister hadn't saved that money so I could buy a comfortable life. She'd saved it so I could survive. So I could be protected when she wasn't here to protect me anymore. And the only way to honor that was to keep protecting, to keep building life rafts for people who were drowning the way I'd drowned. I called Patricia 6 months after I moved. I want to start a foundation, I told her, supporting single mothers escaping domestic situations, women who are being told they're crazy, who are losing everything while everyone watches. She didn't ask if I was sure, didn't question if I was ready, just said, let's do it. We met the next week to plan. Patricia brought a legal pad filled with notes, research she'd already done on nonprofit structures and grant-making foundations. She'd been thinking about this too, I realized. Had been waiting for me to be ready. There are a lot of organizations doing good work in this space, she said, but most of them focus on physical abuse, domestic violence shelters, restraining orders, that kind of thing. Very few specialize in financial abuse, in helping women who aren't being physically harmed, but are being systematically destroyed in other ways. That was our niche, the women who couldn't prove they were being abused because there were no bruises, no police reports, no evidence except their own dwindling bank accounts and their own eroding sense of reality. The women everyone told were just bad with money, just overly emotional, just making excuses. We need to be careful about how we structure this, Patricia said. Your ex-husband can't know you're involved. If he finds out, he'll try to claim you're using marital assets for personal projects. Even though legally that's nonsense, it could tie things up in court for years. So we built the foundation in layers. Patricia's name on the paperwork. A board of directors that didn't include me. Structures that kept me anonymous while still letting me guide the work. It was complicated, expensive, but necessary. We started small. A website, a phone number, connections to local shelters and legal aid organizations. The foundation would provide emergency funding for women trying to leave abusive situations. Money for first and last month's rent, money for lawyers, money for the kind of fresh start that's impossible when you're being financially controlled. The website was simple, just information about what we did and how to contact us. No photos of me, no personal story, just the facts. We help women experiencing financial abuse. We provide emergency funding. We connect you with resources. You are not alone. The first call came 2 days after we launched. A woman in Tennessee, 46 years old, married for 20 years. Her husband had taken her name off their joint accounts last month. She had no access to money, no credit cards. He gave her a cash allowance for groceries and monitored every purchase. When she tried to open her own account, he told her family she was trying to hide money, that she was planning to leave him and take everything. Made her sound vindictive, greedy, irrational. I talked to her for an hour, heard my own story and hers, the isolation, the careful construction of her instability, the way everyone believed him because he seemed so reasonable, so concerned, so patient with his difficult wife. I believe you, I told her. What's happening to you is real. It's abuse. And we're going to help you. We got her connected with a lawyer in her area, set up a separate bank account she could access, provided funds for her to consult with a financial advisor who understood coercive control, gave her a safety net so she could start planning her exit. She left him 3 months later, called to tell me she was safe, that she was staying with a friend, that she'd filed for divorce and had documentation of the financial abuse, that she was going to be okay. You saved my life, she said, but I didn't save her life. Sarah did. Sarah's love, reaching forward through time, saving women she never met, protecting people the way she always protected me. The name came to me one night when I couldn't sleep. The Sarah Chen Foundation. My sister's name. Her middle name was Chen, our mother's family name. She would have liked that. Would have liked knowing her name was attached to protecting people the way she'd always protected me. The first woman we helped was 28 years old with 2 kids under 5. Her husband had taken everything, convinced her family she was unstable. She was living in her car when she called our hotline. We got her into an apartment, connected her with a lawyer, gave her space to breathe and figure out what came next. Her name was Jennifer, though she asked us not to use her real name in any records. She had been a nurse before her husband convinced her to quit her job, told her the kids needed her home full-time, isolated her from her colleagues and friends. By the time she realized what was happening, she had no income, no recent work history, no support system. When she tried to leave, he drained their joint account and told everyone she was having a mental breakdown. I met her at a coffee shop a week after she called the hotline. She showed up 15 minutes early, nervous, her hands shaking as she gripped a paper cup of black coffee she clearly couldn't afford, but bought anyway because she felt she had to order something. Her kids weren't with her. They were at a state-funded daycare, the only childcare she could access. I'm sorry, she said before I could even introduce myself. I'm sorry for taking up your time. I know there are people who need help more than I do. That's what abuse does. It makes you apologize for existing, makes you believe you're not worth helping, makes you think your suffering doesn't count because someone, somewhere has it worse. You deserve help, I told her. What happened to you matters, and you're not taking anything away from anyone else. There's enough help to go around. She cried then, right there in the coffee shop, tears streaming down her face while she tried to stay quiet, tried not to make a scene. I moved my chair closer, didn't touch her. Patricia had taught me that touch can be complicated for people who've been abused, but I sat close enough that she knew she wasn't alone. Tell me what you need, I said. She needed everything. First and last month's rent for an apartment that would take her and her kids, money for a security deposit, enough groceries to fill a pantry, a lawyer who understood financial abuse, childcare so she could go to job interviews, a used car so she could get to those interviews, work clothes, hope, proof that someone believed her. We provided all of it. And 3 months later, she sent me a card. Just 2 words. Thank you. But inside the card was a longer note. She'd gotten a nursing job. Her kids were enrolled in school. She had her own place, her own money, her own life. She was rebuilding. She was surviving. She was proof that what we were doing mattered. I put that note on my refrigerator. It's still there. Sometimes when I'm having a hard day, when the grief feels too heavy, and I wonder if any of this makes a difference, I read it. I remind myself that Sarah's love is still working, still saving people, still building life rafts. I put it on my refrigerator. Started a collection. Every woman we helped, Every person who found their way to us, I kept their gratitude visible. Not because I needed the recognition, because I needed to remember that my sister's love was still working in the world, still protecting people, still building life rafts. A year after I left Memphis, I got a letter. Real mail, forwarded through Patricia's office, from my former mother-in-law. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. I know what he did, it said. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry we all failed you. I hope you're okay wherever you are. I read it twice, then I filed it away. She didn't need my forgiveness. I didn't have the energy to give it. But there was something peaceful about knowing the truth had finally caught up with the lies. That the reality I'd lived had become visible to others, even if it was too late for it to matter. I never heard from him directly. Patricia said he'd tried to find me at first, made some inquiries, but the legal structures she'd built were solid. And eventually, he must have realized I wasn't coming back, wasn't going to engage, wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a confrontation. The truth is, I don't think about him much anymore. He was a chapter in my story, but he wasn't the story. The story was my sister. The story was her love reaching across 4 years of death to pull me back from the edge. The story was learning that sometimes the people who save us are the ones we think we've lost. Marcus would have been 25 this year. I think about him every day. Some days the grief is sharp enough to cut. Other days it's just there. A constant ache I've learned to live with. I talk to him sometimes. Tell him about the foundation. About the women we're helping. About how his grandmother's love saved his mother when nothing else could. I keep a box of his things in my closet. Not everything. I couldn't take everything when I left. But enough. His favorite hoodie, the gray one with the university logo that he wore until it was threadbare. A notebook full of song lyrics he'd written, dreams of becoming a musician that never materialized. His high school graduation photo, the one where he's trying not to smile but you can see it in his eyes. A ticket stub from a concert we went to together when he was 17. Some mornings I take the hoodie out and hold it. It doesn't smell like him anymore. That faded years ago, no matter how desperately I tried to preserve it. But the weight of it, the texture, the way the fabric falls, that's still his. I pull it on sometimes, drowning in the size of it, and I pretend I'm hugging him. Pretend he's still here to wrap his arms around me and tell me everything's going to be okay. He was such a good kid. That's what everyone said at the funeral, and it was true, but it was also incomplete. He was complicated, struggled with anxiety and depression from a young age, had trouble fitting in, finding his place. The world felt too loud for him, too harsh. He needed more gentleness than most people had to give. I saw the signs that something was wrong in the months before he died. The withdrawal, the missed calls, the times he'd say he was fine when I could hear in his voice that he wasn't. But I didn't know how to reach him, didn't know the language of his particular pain, didn't know that the pills he was taking weren't prescribed by a doctor. The guilt of that sits with me always. The what-ifs. What if I'd pushed harder? What if I'd shown up at his apartment more often? What if I'd been paying better attention instead of being wrapped up in my own life, my own problems? Would he still be alive? Would I have caught it in time? Patricia says the what-ifs will kill you if you let them. That I can't take responsibility for choices he made, for an addiction I didn't know he had, for a system that failed him long before I could have intervened. Logically, I know she's right. Emotionally, I still carry the weight of feeling like I should have saved him. But I couldn't save him. I can only save the people who are still here. The women who call our hotline. The mothers who are drowning the way I drowned. The people who need someone to believe them, to protect them, to give them a chance to survive. That's how I honor Marcus. By saving the people I can save. By being present for the people who are still here. By building something good from the rubble of my grief. I like to think he'd be proud. That both of them would be proud. That somewhere, somehow, they're watching me build something good from all this pain. The house has become a home. I've made friends here. Not many, but good ones. People who know my story now, who know where I came from and don't ask me to explain or justify or prove anything. The kind of friends who show up with groceries when they know I'm having a hard day, who sit with me on the porch and don't need me to be anything other than what I am. There's Linda, who lives 2 houses down and teaches at the local elementary school. She's about Sarah's age, and sometimes when she laughs, I hear my sister. She was the first person to welcome me to the neighborhood, showing up with a casserole and a warm smile the day after I moved in. She didn't ask why I'd moved here, didn't pry into my past, just said, "Welcome. If you need anything, I'm number 17. We started having coffee together on Sunday mornings, sitting on my porch, watching the town wake up slowly. She'd talk about her students, the funny things they said, the challenges of teaching in a small town where everyone knows everyone. I'd listen, grateful for the normalcy of it, for conversations that didn't revolve around trauma or loss or survival. It took me 3 months to tell her about Marcus, about Sarah, about why I was really here. We were sitting on the porch one morning when she mentioned her son, who was away at college, and something in me broke open. The words just came out. All of it. The whole story. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reached over and took my hand. Didn't say, "I'm sorry," or "that must be hard," or any of the empty phrases people offer when they don't know what else to say. Just held my hand and sat with me in the silence. Then she said, "Thank you for trusting me with this. That's what good friendship looks like. Not fixing, not solving, just witnessing, just being present, just holding space for someone's pain without trying to make it smaller or more manageable or easier to bear." There's also Tom, who owns the hardware store downtown, gruff and straightforward, with calloused hands and a dry sense of humor. He helped me figure out what I needed to fix the leaky faucet in my bathroom, then came over and fixed it himself when I couldn't get the parts right. Refused to let me pay him, just said, "Welcome to the neighborhood." These people became my chosen family, the family I built from scratch in a place where nobody knew who I used to be, where I could just be who I am now, where my past didn't define my present. I still wear the rust-colored cardigan with wooden buttons. I've fixed the stain. I wear it when I need to feel strong, when I need to remember I survived. I still carry the velvet pouch everywhere, still keep my grandmother's ring close, but I've added something else to it now. A small photo of Marcus, not the one from his funeral, an earlier one. Him at 15, laughing at something off camera. That's how I want to remember him. Happy, whole, mine for whatever time we had. The Jesus picture still hangs in my hallway. I pass it every morning on my way out. Sometimes I talk to it. "Thank you for not giving up on me," I say, even when I gave up on myself. I don't know if he hears, but it feels important to say it anyway. I cook collard greens sometimes, big batches that I share with neighbors. Food that isn't about scarcity anymore. Food that's about abundance, about having enough, about being able to feed yourself and others without calculating every dollar. The pot simmers low on the stove, and the smell fills the house, and I remember being hungry. Remember rationing. Remember fear. And then I remember I don't live there anymore. The foundation is growing. We've helped 37 women in the last 2 years. 37 women who were told they were crazy, who were losing everything while people watched, who needed someone to believe them and give them a chance to escape. We're expanding next year, opening a second location, hiring staff, building partnerships with other organizations. I meet with each woman we help, sit down with them, look them in the eye, tell them, "I believe you. What happened to you was real, and you're going to survive this." I tell them my story, not all of it, but enough. Enough so they know I understand. Enough so they know they're not alone. Some of them ask how I made it through, how I survived losing my son and my marriage and everything I owned. how I found the strength to rebuild. I show them the velvet pouch, tell them about my sister, about the certificates rolled up in a rubber band at the bottom of a drawer, about love that persists beyond death, about the way protection can be built quietly over years, in small acts that don't seem significant until you need them desperately. Someone loved you enough to prepare for your survival, I tell them. Now we're going to help you love yourself enough to claim it. I've learned things I never wanted to know. About financial abuse and gaslighting and the ways systems fail women who are trying to leave. About how easy it is to lose everything when you're vulnerable. About how hard it is to rebuild trust in yourself after someone has systematically convinced you that you can't trust your own mind. But I've also learned about resilience. About the way grief can coexist with hope. About how love doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms. It finds new ways to work in the world. It saves us in ways we never expected. Scientific studies prove that having 4 or more traumas increases the risk of alcoholism 4 to 12 times. I've lived multiple traumas. Marcus's death, the abuse, the poverty, the isolation. I could have gone under. Almost did. There were nights when drinking seemed like the only way to make the pain stop, when numbness felt like the only achievable goal. But my sister's love reached across 4 years of death and pulled me back, gave me something to hold on to when I had nothing else, gave me proof that I was worth saving, worth protecting, worth fighting for. That's what I try to give the women we help, proof that they're worth saving, that what happened to them wasn't their fault, that survival is possible even when it doesn't feel possible, that there are people who will believe them and protect them and help them build something new. I think about writing a book sometimes, about this whole experience, about losing Marcus and being gaslit and finding the inheritance and starting over. But I'm not sure I could do it justice. Not sure I could translate this particular kind of pain and salvation into words that would make sense to someone who hasn't lived it. Maybe that's what the foundation is. My book written in actions instead of words. My story told through the lives of the women we save. My sister's legacy continuing to grow and protect and build life rafts for people who are drowning. She's been gone 4 years now. Marcus has been gone too. The grief hasn't gotten smaller. I've just gotten bigger around it. Learned to carry it without being crushed by it. Learned to live a life that honors their memory without being consumed by their absence. I'm 42 years old. I live in a quiet town where nobody knows my history. I run a foundation that protects women the way I needed to be protected. I have enough money to never depend on anyone again. I have friends. I have purpose. I have peace. Some days are still hard. Some days the grief hits me like a wave and I can barely breathe. Some days I see a young man Marcus's age and I have to look away before the tears start. Some days, I wonder what my sister would think of the life I've built, if she'd be proud or disappointed or surprised. But most days, I'm okay. Most days, I wake up in my house with the porch and the yard, and I make coffee, and I look at the Jesus picture, and I say thank you. Thank you for survival. Thank you for salvation. Thank you for love that doesn't end when the person dies. Most days, I touch the velvet pouch and I feel her there. Feel her protection still working, still building, still keeping the promise she made all those years ago. I'll always take care of you, no matter what. And she is. Even now, even from 4 years in the ground, she's still taking care of me, still protecting me, still loving me in ways that matter more than money ever could. The money was never really the point. The point was knowing someone loved me enough to plan for my survival. Someone saw me clearly enough to know I would need saving and saved me anyway. Someone believed I was worth protecting even when I didn't believe it myself. That's the inheritance that matters, not the $450, $0. The knowledge that I was loved, am loved, will always be loved by someone who saw my worth even when I couldn't see it. That's what I try to give the women we help. Not just money, not just resources, but the knowledge that they're worth saving, that someone sees them, believes them, is willing to fight for them when they're too tired to fight for themselves. That's my sister's legacy. That's how I keep her alive. That's how I honor her memory and Marcus's memory, and the memory of the woman I was when I sat in that empty church with $68 and no hope. I'm not that woman anymore. I'm someone else now. Someone stronger. Someone who knows how to survive. Someone who knows how to be saved and how to save others. Someone who carries love forward like a torch passed in the dark. If you're listening to this and you're in a situation like I was, if someone is telling you you're crazy, if you're losing everything while people watch, I need you to hear this. You're not alone. What's happening to you is real. And you can survive this. Find people who believe you. Document everything. Protect yourself legally and financially. Get out if you can. And know that somewhere, someone has loved you enough to want you to survive, even if you can't see it yet, even if you don't believe it yet. The love exists. The protection exists. You just have to hold on long enough to find it. My sister saved me with certificates she bought over decades, with small acts of love that added up to survival. You might not have that, but you have something, some resource, some strength, some spark that hasn't been extinguished yet. Hold on to it. Build from it. Let it be the beginning of something new. Let it be proof that you're worth saving. Because you are. Even when it doesn't feel like it. Even when you're sitting in an empty church with nowhere to go and no one coming to help. You are worth saving. And if you're listening to this and you've lost someone who protected you, someone who loved you fiercely and completely, I need you to know this. Their love didn't end when they died. It transformed. It's still working in the world, still protecting you in ways you might not see yet, still building your survival in small acts that will reveal themselves when you need them most. Pay attention to the forgotten objects, the drawers you haven't opened, the documents you haven't sorted. The love that was left for you might be waiting there, rolled up in a rubber band, marked with a note that says, "For when you need it, you'll need it. We all need it. And the love will be there." Because that's what love does. It persists. It protects. It builds life rafts for people who are drowning. It reaches across death and loss and time to save us when we think we're beyond saving. My son died 2 years ago. My sister died 4 years ago. But their love is still here. Still working. Still making the world a better place. Still saving people who need saving. That's everything. That's the inheritance that matters. Not money, not property, not things. Just love. Love that persists. Love that protects. Love that never really ends. Where are you listening from? Have you ever been saved by someone who wasn't there to see it? Have you ever carried someone's love forward after they were gone? Tell me in the comments. Share your story. Let's build something together. Let's honor the people who loved us by loving others the same way. If this story resonated with you, if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it, like it, subscribe. Help me reach the people who need to know they're not alone. That survival is possible. That love persists even when we think it's gone. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for carrying your own stories and your own survival. We're all just trying to make it through. We're all just trying to honor the people who loved us. We're all just trying to build life rafts for each other. And that's enough. That has to be enough. That's everything.